Welcome to the Close the Chapter podcast. I am Kristen Boyce, a licensed marriage and family therapist with a private practice, Pathways to Healing Counseling. Through conversations, education, strategies, and shared stories, we will be closing the chapter on all the thoughts, feelings, people, and circumstances that don't serve you anymore and open the door to possibilities and the real you. You won't want to miss an episode, so be sure to subscribe. Welcome to this week's Close the Chapter podcast. I am so grateful you're here. It is so important that we come together and have community around the worries we have, anxieties. This episode is so good because I have an OCD expert, Obsessive-Compulsive Disorder. But I want you to think about obsessive-compulsive disorder differently. I want you to think about it as obsessive thoughts, maybe ruminating thoughts, looping thoughts and anxieties that you just can't shake. That this is the episode for you. We talk about a 5-step process on how to work through those worries. We talk about what's at the root of these worries and how do we work through them. Because at the end of the day, it consumes us and we get exhausted by it because it lives in our body as well. So it's such an important episode. If you want to have additional help, grab the journal for free at Kristen, Kristend, Boyce, Boice.com and grab it. It'll be emailed to you. And then you're on the list of all the amazing content. Hopefully it's amazing that you will get each week. I just send you it once a week and then you don't miss out on anything. Let me introduce you to my guest today. Ben Eckstein is a therapist specializing in treatment of OCD, anxiety, and obsessive-compulsive related disorders. Ben honed his specialty in OCD while working at McLean Hospital's OCD Institute. He's now the owner and director of Bull City Anxiety and OCD Treatment Center in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Ben is the vice president of the OCD North Carolina, the NC state affiliate for the International OCD Foundation. In addition to his clinical work, Ben is a speaker, trainer, author, and his first book, Worrying is Optional. Don't you love that? Don't we want worrying to be optional? Break the cycle of anxiety and rumination that keeps you stuck. And that is the focus of our conversation. I really enjoyed Ben and he provided so much helpful information. So if you are stuck in anxiety and overthinking, listen to the whole episode and share it with somebody and start talking about it and naming it when it happens and having the tools and a way to work through it will help set you free. So enjoy this conversation with Ben. Welcome to the Close the Chapter podcast. I am so glad you are here with me for this important conversation about worrying. And maybe you have some OCD tendencies. Maybe you have a loved one or a family member that struggles with OCD or rumination where you kind of looping thoughts on the repeat. This is the episode for you. Ben, welcome to the Close the Chapter podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. Your book is what pulled me in. I was like, yes. Let me just tell everybody, I know I said it in the intro, but worrying is optional. People are like, really? I don't feel like worrying. So your title intrigued me. And break the cycle of anxiety and rumination that keeps you stuck. Tell me about how you came up with the book and the title and all the things.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest here. The publisher kind of came up with the title. But I get it. And so, I think it does pull a lot of people in. I think that's what they were going for. So I will say what I really like. So there's somewhere I think on the back of the book, there's a little tagline, which is worry happens, worrying is optional. And I really like that part. Or like that. I think that's kind of what we're trying to get to is that idea of like, hey, we all have fears, we all have anxiety, we all have worries, we have these thoughts that show up and we don't know what to do with them. But then there's this other process that happens. There's like this thing that flows from that initial thought. And that's a thing that we actually can interact with a little bit more. We can have some choice and some agency in figuring out how we respond when those initial worries come up. And so, I think the title kind of catches people. But yeah, I think you have to dig in a little bit more to see what that's really about, which is this idea that, yeah, of course, there are these parts of it that we don't really control, but there are other parts that we do have a say over, and we can learn how to kind of manage that a little bit differently. So that's what I was trying to go for with the book, is to help people to find these ways to actually, yeah, have this sense of agency and control in these places where they feel like they may not.
I think that's good because people feel like it's out of control. They're like, I feel like I cannot control this. I don't have hope that this will ever get better because they run my life. These worries, these rumination, these anxiety, this anxiousness kind of runs the show. So this kind of says, okay, worrying is optional. They're like, well, it doesn't feel like it. So where does someone even like begin to start this healing journey?
Yeah, that's a good question. And for sure, I think that's a thing that I hear a lot is like, no, but I don't have control over this. It just happens. And I always try to start by just kind of validating that, hey, I get why you're saying that, because that probably has been your experience, that it just happens and it's kind of automatic. This is just how I am. It's how I've always been. And this is how it will always be. I don't think that's it, right? Like that, I think, okay, that's been your experience so far. I think what I was trying to get to with the book is that I think what most people hear in those moments is like, oh, just stop worrying. It's not a big deal. Don't worry about it. And that obviously doesn't really work. For anyone who's ever worried about something, somebody saying, hey, don't worry, that doesn't quite cut it. So yeah, instead of saying just stop, I think what we're trying to figure out is how do we kind of relate to these things a little bit differently. And so what I talk about in the book is just this idea that there's a lot of nuance to this. So I think it's not as simple as saying just stop, but I think for each individual person, their worry is probably driven by a bunch of different stuff. I think that could be these experiences that we've had. It could be whether we have cognitive distortions or these different ways of looking at things. We might have beliefs about anxiety or worry. We might get really immersed in that experience when it happens, right? Like there's a bunch of different processes all happening for all of us. The way I describe it is I think we all have our own kind of unique blend. We have our own proprietary special sauce of processes and mechanisms that are driving that worry. And so I think for each of us, we have to figure out, hey, what is my unique blend of things that are driving this thing? And then how do I engage with that differently? So, for example, if my worry is driven by the belief that I should be able to control my thoughts, then in those moments where these thoughts are happening and I start freaking out because they're now out of control and I feel like I should be able to control them, I think we have to look at that belief and start to kind of maybe reshape these other ways of looking at worry. So, for example, I don't know, worry is something that happens. It's really uncomfortable. I may not be able to control every thought that shows up, but I can control how I then move forward and kind of accept the presence of this thought. That's just one example, but I think we want to kind of tailor these interventions to whatever it is that's driving it for that person. What I always try to emphasize is it's not ever just one thing. I think maybe for me, that's why I don't know, maybe a little disillusioned by like a sort of traditional CBT, which would just say, hey, you should reframe that thought. You're worried this bad thing is going to happen. We're going to reframe that thought by saying, oh, it's possible, but it's really unlikely. And now all of our worry just evaporates and feels better. And so like, I think for any of us, like, hey, maybe that's part of it. Maybe there's some cognitive distortion there, but it's very unlikely that for any one person, there's just one factor driving that worry, that we really have to do this kind of counting and auditing of, hey, like, what are the factors for me? And then how do I plan accordingly to come up with some interventions that will be helpful? Now, that's a long-winded answer to your question, but yeah, I think we have to break it down and figuring out what it is for each person. And then again, we build our interventions accordingly.
People begin to parse out because I've had many clients, for example, one had a phobia of throwing up. And so we would just kind of, okay, have you thrown up at school when we went through all that and it ended up his dad had a heart attack at home and it was connected to that.
Yeah.
And you would think, well, how in the world is that connected? But the body connected this unexpected thing happening to this fear of throwing up.
I love that example. As I work with a lot of emetophobia, that fear of vomiting, one of the things that I really like about it, it's maybe a funny way to put it, but like what I think is really interesting is that this one fear can be driven by so many different things. And so like, I think with that example, so just to go through it. So yeah, I think we sometimes have these bad experiences that inform our reaction. And so, yeah, sometimes maybe it's something happened with dad. So I find very often it's when I was a kid, I threw up in the middle of class and it was really embarrassing. And now I'm really afraid that's going to happen again. So sometimes we have these experiences. And this is often how a lot of phobias work. You have that fear of dogs because you got bit by a dog when you were a kid, right? Like it has sort of a traumatic origin. There's a lot of other stuff that drives it. So again, think about emetophobia. It might be you have disgust sensitivity. You are just somebody who feels disgust really, really intensely. And so you have this aversion to that kind of experience. For a lot of people, there's social anxiety involved, that they're worried not just about vomiting, but they're worried about other people seeing it. And are they going to judge them? They're going to be so embarrassed and humiliated. For a lot of people, there's uncertainty involved, right? So it's that, hey, like, it's not so much that I so scared of the vomit itself. It's that inability to sit with not knowing when I'm going to throw up. So a lot of people say to me like, hey, if I could just know, hey, I don't know, on September 15th, you're going to throw up, they would be fine. They'd say like, okay, September 15th, I'll be ready for it. It'll suck, but I'll get through it. But it's the not knowing that's really driving it. For a lot of people, it can take on kind of an OCD sort of flavor. And so regardless of the origin, there starts to be this cycle that perpetuates it. So I'm worried about throwing up. And now I'm bringing, I don't know, anti-nausea things with me everywhere. I'm avoiding any food that might potentially be triggering. I'm avoiding getting sick because then I might throw up if I get sick, right? So like you start to have this cycle that perpetuates it behaviorally. So again, these are just a few examples, but I think these are the kinds of things we want to be looking at. So we can take this one external thing, this one symptom of, hey, I'm scared of throwing up. But yeah, we want to look at, well, what's driving that? Is it these fears, these beliefs? Is it disgust? Is it anxiety? That we have to figure out what's driving it. So I'll come back to your question of like, so how do we do that? I usually have people do a log. I will say I hated busy work. I hated worksheets as a kid. Anyone who assigns me anything where I have to fill in the blanks, I was immediately mad and oppositional, and I don't like it. But I will acknowledge these things are pretty helpful if you can get yourself to do them. So yeah, I want people doing a log. And I think what I really want to capture there is just all of these different angles. So in part of the treatment this comes from the treatment for body-focused repetitive behaviors. So things like trichotillomania, skin picking. They do this thing called SCAMP, which stands for sensory, cognitive, affect, motor, and place. And we don't have to delve into all of these things, but it's really just saying like, okay, so with that example, okay, we're skin picking and we're trying to do a log of a typical day in the life. And in each of these moments where you're picking your skin, we're going to look at the sensory. So like, what is that physical sensation? What does it feel like? Cognitive, what are the thoughts going along with it? So it might be something like, hey, I'm just going to do it this one time, or, oh, this is how I'm going to take care of my skin, or I really need it to be even, things like that. There's affect. Are you bored? Are you anxious? Is there some sense of tension? Motor, what are you physically doing? Are you using your fingers? Are you using a tweezer? That kind of thing. And then place, what is the circumstance? Are you at home? Are you sitting on the couch? Are you in your car? So even though that model is built for body-focused repetitive behaviors, I think it can apply to pretty much anything. I think any of these places where we're trying to get a really good snapshot of a behavior and all these different facets of it, I think it's a really handy way to just capture kind of the breadth of that experience. So I don't want a log that just says, yeah, I don't know, Monday at 9:00, I was worrying. That doesn't help me at all. I want to know, hey, what was the situation? What were you thinking? What were you feeling? We want the whole textured, nuanced version of it. And so I think that's a really good place to start, because then we can start to notice the patterns. What are the themes? What are the things that keep coming up? And then we can figure out, okay, so where's our point of intervention?
So let's go over those again. So for those that
Yeah,
are like,
yeah,
well,
yeah.
okay, I really like that, but we're going to go just so someone wants to start keeping a log, which you're inviting them into, because can help with the worrying cycle with phobias and fears and intrusive thoughts. Okay, so let's go over it again. So one,
sensory. So the acronym I have a terrible memory. The acronym is helpful, right? So it's SCAMP. And so, yeah, the first one is sensory. And so, yeah, here we're just trying to tap into all of these different kind of physiological sensations. And I think it's especially relevant with things like body-focused repetitive behaviors, because often there's a feeling of, oh, my skin is rough, or if it's hair pulling, oh, this particular hair, I don't know, it has a split end, or
Mhm.
it's all the others are smooth and this one feels rough or uneven, right? So I think it often has that really tactile kind of experience. But I do think this comes up, and maybe it blurs a little bit with that more emotional side of things with anxiety, where, okay, so maybe it's not as about your body as the feeling of anxiety. But for a lot of people, there can be just this feeling of not being at ease or thing, I think comes up a lot with kind of uncertainty and that nagging, not just right kind of experience where, yeah, well, for a lot of people, it's almost like a falling out of my skin kind of thing where it just doesn't feel right. So yeah, I think that's a really important thing to be tracking. And again, not all of these things will apply to everyone. There may be folks out there who say like, yeah, that's not really my experience of it. And that's fine, right? So that part of the acronym might not be as relevant, which is okay. The next one, the C, is cognitive. And so these are all the thoughts that we're having. And so I think partly curious if we're talking about anxiety and worry. So what are the thoughts that come up? Hey, I'm worried I'm going to fail that test on Friday, or I'm worried something bad is going to happen to someone I love. I think sometimes we're looking at the thought itself that is triggering and anxiety provoking, but I'm also really interested in the thoughts about the thoughts. So it's not just, hey, I'm worried something bad is going to happen. It might also be, hey, I'm worried that if I don't think about this enough, then I'm being irresponsible. I have some obligation to think about it so I can prevent the bad thing from happening. It might be that, hey, this is my only coping skill. If I don't think about it, then this thing is going to get out of control. It's going to get worse. And then I'm not going to be able to handle that. So again, I think it's not just the content and like the thing that's triggering. It's also how we make sense of it and the kind of meaning and beliefs about that thing, the content.
Yeah,
That
because
makes
it's trying to
sense?
protect you. Like maybe it's, oh, this is going to protect me, like you said, something bad happening. So if I give this up,
Yeah.
then I'm setting myself up for something bad happening. So that would be something you'd want to write down.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like as therapists, we're often encouraging people to think in positive and optimistic ways. And I think this is the one place where those positive beliefs about worrying are actually really unhelpful. Where we're saying like, oh, this is an effective strategy. Like this is something that's going to prevent the bad things from happening. And it's not. When we're talking about worrying, we're talking about just spinning our gears. We're not moving forward. We're in neutral. Nothing is happening here. And I think that belief of, hey, this is effective, this is how I cope and deal with it, can actually be kind of disincentivizing. It can keep us stuck in it when what we really want to do is kind of break free of this place where we're just
I think that's good for
churning.
people to hear because they're afraid if they give up that thought,
Yeah.
this is the consequence. And really, it's not.
Right.
It's actually keeping you in it and stuck, and it's not serving a purpose.
Yep.
So I think that's important.
Absolutely. My go-to example here is like, hey, if I have a test coming up on Friday, do we want to worry about that test or do we want to study for that test? And let's be really clear, worrying is not studying. These are two very different things. And I think so many people get stuck in, oh, I have a test. It's really important. I want to do well. I should worry about it. And it's like, no, like that has nothing to do with the outcome of the test. And again, you name the scary thing. Oh, I don't want something bad to happen to my loved one. I don't want to lose my job. Any of these things. Worrying will not make those things better. Performing well at your job will help. Taking care of your loved ones, that'll help. But worrying about it won't change anything. And I think we so often conflate these two things that people have something that feels uncomfortable, they're uncertain, or they think something bad is going to happen. And I think in a lot of these places, we don't have things we can do about it. I think about like, hey, I want my loved ones to be okay. Yeah, of course we do. I don't always have the power to ensure that everyone is okay. And that's really, really uncomfortable. It's kind of painful to have to accept that I don't have control over these things. And I think for a lot of us in these places where we hit the limits of our control,
Mhm.
we say, well, I'm not satisfied with that. I still want something to do. And so we start worrying about it, but that's not actually helpful. It's sort of this illusion of having something to do in these places where unfortunately we just have to accept we don't control everything and it sucks.
And that can be a journey for folks to get
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we have this sensory, we have cognitive, we're working on
Yeah.
SCAMP, and then we have the A.
Yeah. Yeah. So A is affect. This is therapist lingo for emotions. I don't know why we don't just call them emotions, but for whatever reason, we've decided we have to call it affect. But these are emotions. And so again, I think when we're talking about worrying, anxiety is often the big one that's coming up. But again, I don't think that's always true. I think that's often part of the experience. But as we talked about, sometimes there is that kind of not just right, something is off, something is incomplete kind of thing. I think with worrying, we're often hoping to get to some really satisfying conclusion. And so that feeling of things not quite getting there is really uncomfortable for people. And again, I think that's not necessarily anxiety. The example I usually use, which is the one that always bothers me, is I won't spoil anything, but I always think about the ending of The Sopranos, which is kind of famously ambiguous and uncertain. And again, that's not necessarily anxiety. That's just like, ooh, this isn't quite satisfying. Like, I want that satisfying conclusion. I want the resolution. I'm not scared. I'm just, yeah, kind of dissatisfied.
Unsettled.
And I want to keep it going. Right. So, yeah, I think that's also falls into that kind of hard to pin down emotion, but it's yeah, maybe adjacent to anxiety. It's not exactly the same thing. And then I think there are other things in there as well. I think especially if we are feeling like we have some responsibility to worry about things, then we might be feeling things like guilt or shame. I think there are other emotions that can drive this as well. So yeah, I think we just want to kind of take a pulse on that. The next one, motor. So again, this was built around in skin picking. So here we're talking about these very specific things. Are you using your fingers? Is it your right hand or your left hand? But I think when we start to apply this more broadly, I think we're really talking about, and maybe it blends in with that last one around place, but like we're talking about what are you physically doing? And I know for a lot of people, worrying tends to happen in these sort of predictable places. It's the drive to work. It's laying in bed when you're trying to go to sleep. I think we can often come up with these sort of environmental factors that play into it. Again, I think it does dovetail with that last one where we're talking about just, again, situational factors. And I think it's physically, where are you? What are you doing? But I think it's also more broadly like, what's the situation? And so here I would think about, I don't know, like having downtime, that it might not necessarily be, oh, it's when I'm on my couch or in bed. It might just be, hey, like when I have unstructured time and I'm kind of left to my own devices, that I tend to focus internally and get stuck in some of these thoughts. I think we want to just start to notice some of those situational factors that kind of play into it.
Oh, this is so helpful for people to have a format. If you don't know where to start, just use SCAMP. Start there and see what comes through. How much does family of origin, like your parents, your environment growing up, play a role in worrying, OCD, anxiety? Where would you put that?
Excellent question. And so I give you a very therapist-y answer, which is, well, it depends and everyone's different. And I think that is the real answer.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. But to not completely dodge the question, I think it is relevant. It depends on the person. So I think that family of origin stuff, I see it playing in a couple of different ways. So I think that sort of attachment kind of approach to things and just noticing, hey, I think if you grew up in a home where things were unsettled, where there was a lot of volatility, it makes sense that you might respond to that by being a little more hypervigilant, being a little on edge, paying attention to a lot of these different details, feeling like you have to think it through to make sure it's okay. So yeah, I think there are certainly these ways where the way that our parents raise us, the way that we connect with our parents, hey, this factors into our ability to be at ease in the world. I also, the obvious, like, hey, genetics are also part of this. And so, hey, it is fairly common for people who have a lot of anxiety and worry to also have parents who have anxiety and worry. So I think that's in there somewhere as well. I also see it with these beliefs. So like, I think if you grow up seeing a parent who's really worried about things or who thinks that that is their way of navigating the world, of dealing with the problems that come up, then yeah, it can be this sort of learned behavior in some ways that, hey, this is what you do when you have a problem, you think about it a lot. And so, yeah, I see it factoring in a lot. I think the limitation of that I think is really important just to note with anxiety is that it also can become this sort of self-perpetuating cycle. And so I'm always really intentional about pointing out. So when we delve into that, the family of origin stuff, hey, what was the environment that kind of cultivated this response? We have to note that, okay, it created this response, but now we're in this cycle that's perpetuating it. And so even if we have insight about these experiences, even if we see how it came to be this way, that by itself probably won't change this experience. Like that insight is a really wonderful tool to help us to then make some adjustments that will stop perpetuating that cycle. And so I think this is especially true with OCD. I think it's true more broadly of anxiety as well, but OCD is sort of notorious for being this really behaviorally driven thing. And so even when you do have those insights about, oh yeah, I had this experience and that's why I have the particular obsession that I have, we still need to eliminate the compulsions and stop reinforcing that cycle so that we can kind of move through it. So yeah, I think it's all really, really important, but I think we have to make sure that it's not to the exclusion of addressing that other behavioral piece of it.
The compulsion component.
Right.
How
Right.
big is that to really get a handle on? Because that seems to be what people feel like really is hard to work through,
Yeah.
is that compulsion part. Can you talk
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's pretty important. And yeah, I think the place insight is really helpful is in understanding how this cycle works and what's actually happening when you're performing a compulsion. And I'll add that language around compulsion is pretty specific to OCD, but the same thing is also true of any anxiety problem, that there are these behaviors, we might not label them as a compulsion, but there are behaviors that are kind of reinforcing this cycle. So sort of the quick version of this. So we have some trigger, some upsetting thought, something shows up that's anxiety provoking. And
Let's use germs so we can,
yeah,
we
okay.
can kind of take
So
a
yeah,
practical example.
yeah. So let's say I waltzing through life, I go and touch a doorknob and I say, oh no, I might get sick. I start to feel anxious. And so in that moment, I'm worried about getting sick. I'm feeling anxious. And I say to myself, okay, I can make this all go away. I can make the anxiety go down and I can decrease the chances that I get sick by going to wash my hands, right? So I go wash my hands and I feel better. Sounds wonderful. And so this is, if you think back to all of our behavioral Psych 101 stuff, this is negative reinforcement, which means something feels bad and we do a thing to make that bad feeling go away. So it's kind of like they used to do. Skinner had his little Skinner box, which is a thing. It's a little mouse torture chamber where you put a mouse in there and you give it a little shock and the mouse can press a lever and that shock stops. That's negative reinforcement. There's a bad thing and you can do something to make it go away.
Which
But
sounds good if you're on the
yeah,
edge.
it sounds
That sounds
good.
good. So I just want to acknowledge that.
It is good and it feels good in the moment. Like indeed works in the moment. And they're actually, and let's step aside from germs for a sec, just to think about those mice. They actually did experiments around exactly this thing. So if you take a bunch of mice and do exactly this. So the experiments that they did, they had little like electrified grid kind of thing in the thing. They put the mouse in there. And what they did was they show the mouse light and then shock them. So they start to pair the light and the shock. So now all these mice are there. They see the light and they're immediately terrified. They think they're about to get shocked. And so you take all these mice who are conditioned to be afraid of that light. And now we put them in a new situation. And that situation is half of these mice, they're in the little box, they have the light, they have the grid, but they have this little escape thing. They can, they like climb over a little wall and they can go into this other compartment where there's no electrified grid. And the other mice are just stuck in that same little box. But the change that they make is that now there's no more shock. So those mice who can escape, they see that light, they say, oh crap, I'm about to get shocked. And they run over to the other compartment. The mice who are stuck in it, now they see the light and there's no shock. And so those mice get to eventually learn, oh yeah, the light's not dangerous anymore. There's no shock coming. But these mice who are escaping, they never get to learn it. You can show those mice that light for the rest of their little mouse lives, and they will forever run into that other compartment, never learning that there's no shock coming anymore. And so I think this is what we're doing essentially with OCD. We're saying, hey, there's a bad thing coming. I can do a thing to make it go away. And it works temporarily. Like those mice they're avoiding the shock. But what they're missing out on is this opportunity to learn that it's not actually dangerous. And so just to go back to the germ. So if I touch that doorknob, I go wash my hands. I'm going to be saying, phew, good thing I washed my hands. Otherwise, I would have gotten sick. That I am learning that the reason I'm okay is because I washed my hands.
The thought
just like those
connected the two. Okay.
Right, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Just like those mice are learning the reason I'm okay is because I ran over to this other little compartment. What we're trying to do with OCD, and I would say more largely with anxiety, is we're trying to say, okay, I touched that doorknob. I say, oh no, I'm going to get sick. And now I don't wash my hands. And now my brain can learn, oh, wait a minute, that doorknob wasn't dangerous in the first place. You didn't need to do anything. you're okay just because you're okay. There was nothing required to make you okay. You can just sit with that. You can feel scared. You can say, oh no, I'm going to get sick. And in fact, nothing bad is going to happen. And so I think this is a lot of, so with OCD, we do a thing called exposure and response prevention, which is essentially just intentionally creating these learning opportunities. So we're going to intentionally go touch that doorknob. We're going to intentionally resist washing our hands. And now we're giving our brain this opportunity to kind of relearn. So it's essentially like the mice who are stuck in that little chamber, right? Like that. They're saying, hey, I am going to learn that there's no longer a shock coming. It's okay. So yeah, this is the goal, that we are with a lot of anxiety. We're just saying, hey, our brain has come to associate danger with whatever this thing is.
Yeah.
Could be a phobia, could be anything. And the point of resisting compulsions is to give our brains an opportunity to kind of relearn, to learn that, hey, this thing I thought was dangerous, turns out it's actually not dangerous, or it's not as dangerous as I thought. Sometimes our brains just need help triaging that and making sense of it. I think our brains, the other example I use a lot is that our brains tend to generalize danger really quickly. It's sort of a way of keeping ourselves safe. So the example I usually use, so if I'm a caveman and I see my caveman friend get mauled by a bear, I'm going to conclude that bear's dangerous, go back to the cave, right? That would be an excellent conclusion. That bear indeed was dangerous. But our brains are pretty handy in that we don't have to keep learning that same thing over and over again. We generalize. So I don't just say that bear is dangerous. I say all bears are dangerous. I don't know, that black bear, we're going to say all the black bears, the grizzly bears, the polar bears, the koala bears, you name it. All of the bears, they're dangerous. Go back to the cave. And this is why we are still alive. We have survived because we generalize danger. So what we don't want is to say, oh, that bear mauled my friend. That other bear over there, that's probably a nice bear. Let's go pet that bear. We don't want to do that. We would all die. It's not a good solution. But where this gets tricky is if I then see a black sheep and I say, well, it has a snout, it has 4 legs, it's kind of fuzzy, go back to the cave, right? And so now our brains overgeneralize, and it's with good intention. They're trying to keep us safe, but we sometimes get a little out of control with this stuff. And so here, the point of exposure is saying, hey, we're going to learn to properly discriminate between the things that are actually dangerous and these things that are not. So if we were doing exposure, we'd be saying, okay, we're going to go pet that sheep. We're going to see, hey, the sheep is not going to kill us. It's just going to be a sheep. And there's uncertainty here. And I usually will point out to people, I should look this up. I haven't yet. I'm sure in the history of sheep, someone's been killed by a sheep. I assume it's happened. It's probably happened a few times. We're not saying it's a guarantee that it's all going to be okay. We're just saying, hey, this response is probably unwarranted. The sheep's probably fine. Use reasonable precautions and it'll be okay. So yeah, I think that's the point of eliminating these compulsions. So I won't belabor this example too much, but like if I approach the sheep and I'm wearing armor and I have like an axe in my hand, I'm not really going to learn what I need to learn. I'm going to learn I survived, but it's because I had these extra precautions. So if I approach the sheep and there's a big fence and I have all these things, I'm not actually going to learn what I need to learn. I'm going to learn you're safe as long as you meet all of these terms and conditions. And I think that's what we're trying to do when we're eliminating compulsions. We're just trying to remove the terms and conditions, these things that are kind of interfering with learning that we're actually okay.
And I think you said something that I want to highlight that I think is important. Let me just ask you about building our tolerance for uncertainty. Because really, we don't know what's going to happen minute to minute. And I know this is mind blowing, but we just don't.
Yeah.
And we want to, because we want to feel safe. So how do we start befriending uncertainty?
Yeah. I like that way of putting it. Yeah. It's an excellent question. I mean, I think we want, as with most things, I think we want to kind of validate like, hey, this stuff is uncomfortable. It's okay that it's uncomfortable, right? Like this is a human experience. I get it. I wish I could know all sorts, not just the ending of The Sopranos, but like all sorts of things that I wish I could know. The importance. I wish I could be assured that I'm going to live a long, happy, healthy life and all of my loved ones will do the same. And I want that very badly. And it's okay to want that. Unfortunately, we cannot have that. It's just simply not an option. And I think with that and with many things, that doesn't mean we can't have any assurance that I can be reasonably assured that things are okay, right? And so I think about like getting in my car to drive somewhere. I can make sure that I'm not driving drunk and I'm stopping at stop signs and I can make sure my car's in good repair and like there's stuff that I can do to try to increase the chances that I survive that car ride. I know that I have to stop short of 100% certainty. The only way to have 100% certainty is to not get in the car. And so I think for any of us, if we are choosing to live any kind of life where we do anything at all, we have to accept some amount of uncertainty. Again, it doesn't mean we can't do reasonable things. It just means we do have to make space for this discomfort of saying, hey, like part of the cost of admission of living life is taking on some amount of risk. It's really uncomfortable. We wish that that wasn't the case, but it just simply is. And yeah, I think we do have to embrace it, befriend it. For me, the thing that's really helpful there is in just kind of like affirming why that's important. And so I don't think we have to take risks if it's something that's really unimportant to us, something we don't care about. I do a lot of encouraging people to do things that make them anxious and uncomfortable. But it's not because I'm sadistic and I just want them to do uncomfortable things. It's because I want them to live their lives fully and do things that are important and meaningful to them, that are worthwhile. I don't know, like if touching the doorknob doesn't matter.
Like if skydiving would not be a value for me, other people would be like, that'd be amazing. I'm like,
yeah.
you go.
Absolutely. It's funny because I've gone skydiving a couple of times, but I will say they were both before I had family. I think my calculation of that risk would be a little bit different now.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it would, not that, I don't know, that my life was any less worthwhile before I had kids. But yeah, like I think I just sized it up a little bit differently. And yeah, I think that kind of risk I don't think would feel worthwhile. So yeah, I think we want to connect with, hey, what's important about this? Why is it worthwhile? The thing about driving, I think, is a good example where like, hey, we're all welcome to not drive. You can live a life where you don't go a lot of places. You can move to New York City. There's any number of things you can do where you don't have to get in a car. But we do have to accept the limitations that will then impose on our lives. And we have to make choices about where that's worthwhile and where it's not. And I'll say for myself, I drive all the time. I kind of wanted a Vespa and my wife nixed that one. But I think that is one of those things where it's like, yeah, I can get around in a much safer way than a Vespa. And as much fun as that might be, it's probably not the thing that fits in my life right now. And so, yeah, again, we can figure out where this stuff fits and where it doesn't. But I think it does boil down to this acceptance of risk and figuring out where it aligns with our values and where it doesn't. And again, I don't think we have any obligation to do things in these places where it really doesn't resonate or doesn't mean anything to us.
Yeah, you've explained this in such a helpful, resonant way. Truly, you're the best I've talked to on this topic. You're
Thanks.
explaining it in such a practical way. Is there anything we didn't cover that you think is important for people to know that are struggling with worrying, OCD, anxiety, ruminating thoughts, anything that we didn't cover?
I think we covered some good things. I guess one thing that I would add, and I think it falls in that category of kind of like embracing and befriending uncertainty, is that I think there's a lot of room to just get curious about this stuff. And I think anxiety is very uncomfortable for everyone. I don't know any exceptions. For any of us, it's a really uncomfortable experience. And I think it's really easy to fall into this sort of adversarial kind of relationship with anxiety. Like it's bad. It's a thing that we have to control and stop. And the full happy life has to be one that's completely void of any anxiety. And I think just to move into that place of saying like, hey, of course, anxiety is going to be part of our experience. Of course, it's uncomfortable. Of course, we're going to want to get away from it. But I think to move ourselves towards that place where we're making space for it, we're letting it be there, we're recognizing, hey, this is uncomfortable, but it's part of living the life that I really want to live. And I think just getting curious about what happens when we let ourselves do that. I know I have worked with a lot of people who have been so scared of that anxiety that the second it shows up, they're doing something to make it go away, something to try to control it. And I'll often ask that question of like, how long have you given yourself to just get open to it and feel it? I can't tell you how often the answer is like, I don't know, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. Well, yeah, like, have you tried giving it a little bit longer? That it does, just like every emotion you have ever felt, it will come and it will go. You don't have to do anything about that. It'll just come and go all on its own with no intervention. And I'm all for having coping skills and figuring out ways to manage uncomfortable experiences. But the reality of this is we don't need to do anything at all. That anxiety will just come and go on its own. And so I think just that curiosity of seeing like, well, like what happens if I do nothing? Can I just ride this out and let it be? I think when we start to make more space for it and let it just kind of run its course on its own, we usually will stop getting in the way of it and perpetuating this cycle. And I think just a little bit of acceptance and curiosity goes a really, really long way when it comes to just managing that experience.
Everyone needs to take this away from this episode. I mean, there's so many takeaways. That's a huge one. Acceptance and kind of being with and riding the wave of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everyone needs to get your book. Worrying is optional. Please go grab it. My last question is my favorite question because I love books. What has been the most impactful book you've read? And don't be constrained by the question. It can be on anything that has made the biggest difference in your life. What would it be?
So
a hard question.
Yeah.
You can come up with a couple of.
I am debating. I think I know. I think I know my answer. So I would say The Happiness Trap by Russ Harris, which is, if anyone, speaking of acceptance, so this is acceptance and commitment therapy. And there was sort of an original book written about acceptance and commitment therapy. And Russ Harris's book, I think, is the more digestible version of that. I think the reason I really love it for the answer to this question is because I think it's so relevant for anyone. I think there are so many therapy books out there, including mine, which is like, all right, so this is for a specific problem. Here's the problem and here's the solution. And I really love The Happiness Trap because I think it's so much broader than that. It's manual for being a human being and just feeling uncomfortable feelings and learning how to make space for that and learning how to live a value-driven life in spite of whatever experiences show up for you in the moment. I became familiar with this book in working with OCD because I think it's very relevant for this idea of, hey, you're going to feel really anxious and you're going to have to resist doing compulsions and kind of sit with this feeling. But I think the thing that I really loved about it was that it works for anyone. You don't have to have OCD. Again, this is just instructions for living life and being human and feeling really uncomfortable stuff. So yeah, I think if I had to pick one, I think that would be it.
That's awesome. I'm going to get it. Guys, I have not read that one.
Ooh,
so
yeah.
I'm going to get it after you said it. Thank you so much, Ben. Everybody, go get the book and I'll link it in the show notes. I'll link Ben's website in the show notes so you'll know where to find him. And then I'll be in the newsletter as well. So Ben, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I learned a great deal and it was such a joy to talk to you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening to the Close the Chapter podcast. My hope is that you took home some actionable steps along with motivation, inspiration, and hope for making sustainable change in your life. If you enjoyed this episode, click the subscribe button to be sure to get the updated episodes every week and share with a friend or a family member. For more information about how to get connected, visit Kristen, Kristen, Boyce, Boice.com. Thanks and have a great day.